if the team, Azimio team, was saying that the elections was misengineered, we should have seen at the very least those forms showing discrepancies. But that did not happen. So that it is either the Azimio team was playing idolent, or there was absolutely no election rigging that took place. All that was being said to excite the base. Again, put it to you that the law says that peaceably and unarmed.
Definitely.
That is something that we have conveniently always left out. Sometimes you have to ask yourself that, are they peaceably and unarmed? We will not tolerate any law enforcement agency that turns its tools of violence against its own hapless people.
Okay.
The cost of living was a decoy by the opposition to take the people of Kenya to the streets.
So you think it was not a reason?
They were not interested in it. If they were so interested in the cost of living as they were putting it, it should have been Agenda 1. It should have been Agenda 1 so much so that if the government was unwilling to have them deliberate on the cost of living, they would have walked out. We would have believed them.
Well, a very good day to you, ladies and gentlemen, from whichever part of the world you're watching us from. Welcome to another interesting episode of the Candy Talk here on Herman Manyora's YouTube channel. Such a pleasure to have you on board. Well, of course, you're coming to the end of the year, and we want to thank you so much for being part of this family. We want to wish you all the best during this festive season. May you have happy holidays ahead. Now, even in as much as we are going for the holidays, remember our team is still on the ground and life has to continue. We want to keep you updated with comprehensive analysis of everything that is taking place in Kenya and abroad. And of course, we have to make sure that that is done and we don't go to rest before that particular moment. This very evening, I'm joined by a young man here who is quite sharp. Wakili Kidimwaga, how are you, sir?
Easy, my brother. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
How are you holding up?
Well, I'm okay.
Yes.
Let me say I'm managing as a Kenyan.
Yes.
Kenyans are saying they're managing.
Yes.
I wonder how it is on your side.
Sometimes it could be sheer humility. Our brothers from Central Kenya,
Yes.
someone could be driving a Range Rover, but if you ask them how they're holding up, they will tell you, Niko Geria man, yani tunajaribu tu. Yes. Plus, you know, in African societies, I mean, modesty was a good thing. So I'm glad you're modest even in your very elegant suit.
Definitely, thank you so much. So anajaribu tu lakini kwa V8.
But suit naona iko imesimama.
Bana. And definitely, ladies and gentlemen, we are requesting this. If you need to sponsor any of the episodes of our show, kindly hit us up. You can link us. And of course, you can talk to us. Our contacts are down there. Just talk to us and we'll be more than glad to partner with you and sell whatever it is that you want the people to hear about. Now, Kidi,
yes,
welcome to the show. Now, something actually happened that is actually creating a lot of jitters in the country. We're looking at the National Dialogue Committee report that was actually released the other day. Of course, a lot of public funds went into that particular report. But of course, when it came out, there was a lot of complaints from the constituent parties, especially from Azimio, the other side, a number of them saying that they do not agree with that kind of report. But of course, Raila also said that they did their best to ensure that the interests of Kenyans were served in that particular report. I also saw the Jubilee faction also giving in their views, led by the Secretary General Jeremiah Kioni. But of course, Jubilee, I don't want to get into the stuff of Jubilee so much. But of course, Sabina Chege has a stand the other side, but then the faction that is led by Jeremiah Kioni distanced themselves from...
Sabina Chege has Jubilee Asili, and Kioni has Jubilee Kenya.
maybe that is it. And then, so let us get it here. I want to get your honest view on the report from the National Dialogue Committee. What do you feel about it?
Let me say that the report by the NADCO was, I want to be very kind to them, was an imperfect work.
Okay.
Like the work of all mortal men. There is no exercise undertaken by man that will be 100% perfect.
Okay.
The same way our constitution was imperfect, and there is need that we enrich it. The same way our democracy is imperfect. The same way the families we come from are imperfect. So it was an imperfect work done by imperfect men in an attempt to perfect our society.
Okay.
Yes. Some of the recommendations they came up with were recommendations that were anticipated. For instance, when they speak about establishment of the office of the leader of official opposition,
I want us to get into that
does not require rocket science. Establishment of the office of Prime Cabinet Secretary or Prime Minister does not require rocket science. And why is it that they do not require rocket science? The Constitution of Kenya 2010 gave us a pure presidential system. But you know, we live in an ethnically fragmented society. So one thing about an ethnically fragmented society like ours is that to make sure that you deal with the question of ethnic fallout or constant ethnic fallout, then your best shot to deal with that is constitutionalism or constitutional democracy. In constitutionalism is where you deliberately make effort to bring in people from different ethnic societies to feel represented in government. For Kenyan case, you know, after the Littleton Constitution in 1957, we went to the election in 1957. So in 1958, we had what was called AEMO, African Elected Members Organization. The first chairman of AEMO was Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. And all the African leaders were united under AEMO to advocate for independence. But then by the time we get to 1961, when KANU is formed, and quickly KADU is formed, KADU is formed as a countermeasure to KANU. When what is called the minority tribes then were now saying that the majority tribes of the Luo and Kikuyu would dominate them. So then what happens is that now this is what I would call the original sin of our republic. The nationalist, the fallout among the nationalists, or the fallout of the nationalist consensus. So with that, therefore, we go through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s when there is stiff ethnic competition, when everything is viewed through the prism of ethnicity. So this coupled with the oathing, the infamous oathing in Gatundu in the 60s and 70s, when people are made to take muma, the oath that pikipiki aita vuka mtochania, pikipiki itigarika sania. That is how they said it. Essentially, they were saying that leadership had to remain in the house of Gikuyu and Mubi. So you realize that the only time we attempt to deal with this comprehensively is through the Grand Coalition government. And during Grand Coalition government, you realize that a lot of ground was covered and the government was able to deliver because there was very little politics. Everyone felt, or every place felt that they were represented in government. And so the best way to deal, if you look at the fallout, the maandamano that we had, the mass action we had earlier in the year, that led to senseless, unnecessary loss of life, damage to property, and disruption in the economy. It was an ethnic fallout, ethnic political fallout. Yes. So that it was not about the elections per se. It was about people fearing that they would be out of government for so long, and so they had to bring up their stakes. So that is why we have to, our best shot as a society is constitutionalism. There is something Professor Sihanya used to talk about very passionately at the University of Nairobi called autochthonous constitutional making. Autochthonous constitutional making is that when you make a constitution, that constitution making process must take into account the unique circumstances, cultures, political dynamics of the people. After living under the Westminster style for 40, 50 years, actually for 50 years, and living under pure presidentialism for 10 years or 13 years, say 10 years, I think we have seen that we cannot push forward the idea of constitutionalism, deliberately bringing together people to feel so that people can feel represented in government. The problem with pure presidentialism, to begin with, one of the problems is that it makes government look like a duopoly, that it is two communities. And I will tell you why that happens. Number one, our politics are ethnic based. So that you realize that when, say, today if I were to run for president, you realize that the first people who will believe in me will be people from my community. So that when I end up with government, if I look around me, for some reason I will only find Okinyi, who is my tribesman, Odhiambo, who is my tribesman, and therefore they're the people. And then you see, when you make appointment as president, you must be able to appoint people you can trust. People whose judgment you can go to bed knowing that they will get the job done. And so this, for some reason, look at the days of President Kibaki. Look at the civil service. Look at the security. It was full of people from his community. And I think that was also a travesty because Kibaki was supported by a huge section of Kenyans who were not from his community. And Kibaki would have done better. Look at the days of President Uhuru. President Uhuru, look at the civil service. Look at the security. Look at his appointments. I mean, so if we are able to de-ethnicize, to depoliticize our politics, and then we go back to a governance structure that accords with our unique circumstances, where we make sure that we have got the office of the Prime Minister, we have got the office of the Leader of Official Opposition, so that the person who ends up as the first runner-up is not locked out of the management of the country for 5 years. We must find how to make sure that such an individual finds an expression within the running of the country. But in the same vein and breath, I must say this. Earlier in the year, some of us maintained that the president, as the finest expression of our sovereignty, and the first runner-up in the last general elections, the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, would have gotten so much done if they engaged in quiet, direct diplomacy. Had that happened, we would not have witnessed the loss of lives we witnessed and the destruction to property. Because that quiet, direct diplomacy did not happen when some of us were saying that it should have happened. Then we took our people to the streets, lives were lost, properties were damaged, and then we went back to talk. And I mean, so I think that loss of property and loss of lives, damage to property and loss of life was unnecessary. Okay. Thank you.
No. That's why I'm actually asking and wondering, did Kenyans lose their lives and go to the streets for these positions to be created?
This is very personal to me, because in 2017, I was a much more idealistic young man. Like now, then I believed that our politics can be a tool through which we can forge a better society. And so after the Supreme Court determination, so we had what we would call the moral force behind us. We were donning fatigues and we were in the streets chanting, no reform, no election. At some point, we even toyed with the idea of forcing a cessation. So we came up, if you might recall, what was called the People's Assemblies. But then, one afternoon, we turned on our TVs to be told that a handshake had happened. But you see, around that time, a lot of our people were killed by police. So if I was a little reckless, I would have said Uhuru killed our people. So we expected naturally that now that there was a rapprochement between the two sides of the political divide, one of the things that Handshake could have undertaken very seriously was compensation of our people who had fallen victims in the hands of the law enforcement agencies. Because, and this expectation was not far-fetched. Remember in 2007, people who had, been say, removed from their houses, homes, or such, were compensated by the state. So we expected that Handshake should have taken care of our people whom the police had killed. But remember, none of that ever came up. So our people who are maimed are still working with injuries and disabilities in the streets. Those who are killed, tuliwaambia hewala, and we left them to their own devices. So with that in mind, and then, so the question is, why did they die? They died so that, power can be acquired. So we felt, some of us felt that in 2022, we should not have trodden on that beaten path. That is why we were asking the opposition and the government to engage in quiet, direct diplomacy. But you see, you can only engage with the willing. So if you remember, the belligerence that was coming from the opposition ranks was unnecessary, unjustified. And some of it was, and I'm trying to be, what you'd call mindless. Because remember, we were told that there was ethical hackers. When you attempted to listen to that story, the story of the ethical hackers did not pan out. Then we were told that there is a whistleblower. The story about a whistleblower, when it was subjected to scrutiny, it fizzled out.
Was it really subjected to scrutiny?
As a media, you had an opportunity to submit it to scrutiny. Is there something that you were told that you found convincing, that you found intelligent, that you wanted to pursue?
No, those things remained allegations at that particular moment.
Yes, because
they've not been justified up
him
to now.
who alleges must prove. So if there was anything intelligent to it, it would have been aggressively pursued. When it was left to die, the natural death, when some people like myself began to ask questions, it was because there was nothing to it.
The other side.
It was meant to excite the political constituency that our win had been snatched, while that could not have been the case.
The Azimio said that the only way through which you can actually justify and know the truth in all these is to audit the entire electoral process in that particular area, particular election. And they said that the servers should be opened and made public so that people can actually know what exactly took place. And in fact, the issue of opening of the servers and all that was one of the major reasons as to why the other side actually felt that there wasn't electoral justice in that particular area. So up to now, even you can attest to that, we've not seen that prayer from that side answered. So how then do you want us to justify again as the media, yet we know nothing beyond that particular end?
This is what happened. This is how our elections are conducted.
Before we get there, just tell me this: the whistleblower, whatever the kind of allegations that he came forth with were there. Those were his allegations, and you were saying that those were the real results. Yeah. Then what was a better way through which we could actually know the real results apart from getting the information direct from the servers?
There is a maxim in law that the law aids the diligent and not the indolent. It has been a practice in this country that when you are going to an elections, you must have your own agents who then signs your forms. That in the event there is mischief, you are able to catch the thief in the act. That is what happened in 2017, and NASA then was able to prove, and I was intimately involved in 2017 because I was working around Mze then. You then are able to demonstrate to the arbiter, which is in this case the Supreme Court, that we won, but our win was, but if we didn't win, then the other person did not win legitimately. That has been an established practice. So in 2022 elections, tell me anywhere where Azimio was saying that those people have stolen our win, that this is the results we are having from, I vote in Nyamanga primary, that this is the election, the Form 34A from Nyamanga polling station. And this is the form that IBC is claiming is from Nyamanga, and this is the discrepancy.
Definitely.
Did you have any of that at any time?
That debate cannot actually be done conclusively right
It can
now
be
if
done
we get-
conclusively
if we get that-
because there is this oft-quoted case of Maina Kiai. What Maina Kiai case simply said, that elections should be simple and verifiable.
Okay.
In simplicity, I mean, not simplicity, but in the election being simple, in being verifiable, you go, the primary form is Form 34A. So that if the team, Azimio team was saying that the elections was misengineered, we should have seen at the very least those forms showing discrepancies. But that did not happen. So that it is either the Azimio team was playing idolent, or there was absolutely no election rigging that took place. All that was being said to excite the base, to create insurrection. Because remember, at some point, we were being told that people were going to storm State House.
I don't want us to get there. I don't want us to get.
You asked for it. I will give it to you.
Let's come here.
Yes.
Sticking to the NADCO report.
Yes.
Definitely. They've also talked about auditing the elections, the previous elections that we've had here. Definitely the last general elections that took place in the year 2022.
Yes.
To actually attain electoral justice. Going by the recommendations that have been brought forth in that kind of document.
Yes.
Do you think that it has reached a point when, if implemented fully, then we can actually, as a country, forget about electoral injustices?
Electoral injustices is something we have failed to deal with as firmly as we should. And we have only talked about electoral injustices when it is convenient. I believe legitimately that we have not seen a proper commitment from the political class to address themselves the question of political, what you'd call electoral justice, unless it is politically convenient. So for instance, Supreme Court tells us that Uhuru did not win. And so Supreme Court says that IBC should conduct a proper election, and if they do not, Justice Maraga said then, we will nullify again. So that was what should have been a happy place. But then what happens? Even after absconding the repeat elections, remember the Uhuru's second term was a pretty unpopular government. It was a government that, had we stood our ground a little longer, it would have been difficult for Uhuru to govern. And so dialogue would have been a natural recourse. But then remember that an informal arrangement was agreed on. And these two people that were previously nemesis began working together. So that, say they started working together in the interest of the country because there was need for quick return to normalcy as we sort out other issues, then you would expect that we would have agreed that what are the issues that we need to deal with. Then they released the 9-point agenda. But that was the first, of course, red flag about it, in the sense that the 9-point agenda was still not indicated as a government position. It was a commitment between two individuals. Remember, these two individuals, in their own private capacities, they do not have institutional infrastructure. So that eventually this thing has to go back to the formal institutional infrastructure. So the question of electoral reforms is one of those things we should have dealt with in 2018 or dealt with in 2019 or 2020, especially if we were to remain fidel to the recommendations by the Kega Commission. Because the Kega Commission stipulates a time frame within which you can institute reforms, electoral reforms. So we did not do this. Instead, we got into this omnibus called the BBI, and we put in everything there. Remember, even constituencies, delineation of constituencies, which is the work that should be done by the IBC, now was taken over by the BBI task force, which was a misnomer. So I think that the question of electoral reforms, now that the NADCO report indicates that it is something that will be undertaken, I think that let both sides be able to engage in that process with sincerity, because we don't want, after next elections, anybody again undermining the president-elect on account that the elections were not free and fair. We needed to develop a transparent electoral system such that whoever ends up elected as president, even if you were to defeat the first runner-up with one vote, he should be able to respect the fact that the people have ultimately decided, and he will let you govern peacefully for the next 5 years.
Okay.
I think that after the Supreme Court, after the IBC made its determination and the Supreme Court made its determination, at the very least, the Azimio team should have extended grace to the government and the president-elect then. But when they engaged in the belligerence they engaged in, I didn't think it was justified.
No,
because the net effect is that our people lost their lives. And the question is, why did they have to die? So I think that to avoid such scenarios, let us deal with the question of electoral reforms now, electoral justice now, and comprehensively.
Of course, the question that you're asking about our people had to die and all that, definitely that is also a little bit debatable, because you as a lawyer, you know very well that everybody has a right to go and demonstrate, to picket and do all that without necessarily being killed by the police. So when you take us that direction of our people had to die, definitely it was their right to go.
So the question is again,
it was their choice.
The question is again,
but then were the police justified in killing them? Now that is a debate for another.
But but I will again put it to you that the law says that peaceably and unarmed.
Definitely.
That is something that we have conveniently always left out. Sometimes you have to ask yourself that, are they peaceably and unarmed? We will not tolerate any law enforcement agency that turns its tools of violence against its own hapless people.
Okay.
That is unjustified. That is something we cannot tolerate anywhere, particularly in a society that calls itself a constitutional democracy. But remember, again, our people died in 2017. Why did they have to die?
Those are Kenyans who perished during that particular thing.
No, it is something we must bring to an end.
And we actually wonder why.
What we are saying is that we must create an environment where that does not happen, where you do not incite children of people whom you think children are lesser gods into the streets to fight and die for something that can be achieved through dialogue. No, that's what we are saying.
Those people definitely also have their own views by because the same constitution permits these people to go to the streets.
That is true. What I'm saying is that can we be more responsible as leaders, as the citizens, as the people of Kenya? Yes.
Okay, we'll get back to that. Maybe a time will come when we'll have to address all these issues. But now my main concern is, if at all this report by the National Dialogue Committee is implemented, do you believe that we will not see again people go to the streets because of things to do with electoral injustices?
Of course, the NADCO report in isolation is not a silver bullet.
Just sticking to this.
Yes, I'm telling you that not even by any imagine. But it is a critical step, I think, in the right direction.
Okay.
The question of, say, the governance structure, that is something we must ultimately grapple with.
Okay.
The question of electoral reforms, that is something we must agree on. That how do we elect people who manage our electoral processes?
Okay.
What infrastructure do we use? So that we have got an infrastructure that we all agree on, that is transparent, that is unimpeachable.
Okay.
So that even if I defeat you with one vote, of course we establish the threshold that is 50 plus 1. Even if that 50 plus 1 is achieved because of a single vote, let us be able to respect that decision.
Okay, let us conclude by looking at the issue here that has caused problem and that has actually caused jitters and of course the cost of living therein. The government decided, of course, the Azimio side are saying they tried their best to include this into the report, and they're saying that the government refused to listen to them, saying very well that that is their mandate and they have a plan, and that is why Jeremiah Kioni is saying that there is no way they will endorse that particular report, yet the cost of living is still high and people lost their lives on the streets because of the same. What do you make of that?
The cost of living was a decoy by the opposition to take the people of Kenya to the streets.
So you think it was not a reason?
They were not interested in it. If they were so interested in the cost of living, as they were putting it, it should have been Agenda 1. It should have been Agenda 1 so much so that if the government was unwilling to have them deliberate on the cost of living, they would have walked out. We would have believed them. But to talk about everything else and include the cost of living as the last agenda when everyone wants to move on to other things, I think is dishonesty of the highest order.
What of those people who genuinely went to the streets because...
Yes, they were used as pawns. That's what I'm saying. Azimio was not interested in the cost of living.
But truth be said, it was
Azimio was using the cost of living to relitigate the grievances of a lost election. And the people of Kenya, young people of Kenya, were used as pawns. Let us call a spade a spade. Yes. So the question of the cost of living, and I think that, remember that before we went into the elections, there was this one time when Citizen TV was hosting a panel discussion of economists. I remember one of the economists then was Kwame Owino of the Institute of Economic Affairs. There was another lady whose name I cannot recall at the moment, and some other gentlemen. There were 3, if I'm not wrong. And I remember them saying that we were in an economic fix. Because we had mismanaged our public spending so much so that it would take time before we are able to have the economic vitality reminiscent of the days of Kibaki. Again, at the same time, they said that the fact that we were just recovering from the post-COVID shocks and the war in Ukraine was again raging. So these 3 factors were making the economic situation in Kenya very volatile. Volatile in part because, for instance, the question of palm oil. Traditionally, you know where the palm oil has come from. You know what happens when there is, during COVID and even post-COVID. Then you come to public spending and how we managed our public spending. So all these factors put together, those economists, people like Kwame Owino have got no political interest, a particularly direct political interest, had predicted that we would take about 4 to 5 years
for us to recover.
So I think that when now the opposition was saying that the government was responsible for the high cost of living, they were just being dishonest. Dishonest in part because I think that there is just so much a government can do to lower the cost of living. And before, it cannot wave some magic wand and then there is all of a sudden there is the lower cost of living. So then I know there is a question of taxes. The one thing we must agree is that governance has got its practical and pleasant bits and pieces that we must agree with. And the cost of running government must constantly be shouldered by the people of that polity. So the people of Kenya must be responsible for the cost of running their own government. So as a result, the government had to get money to sustain itself. I know people have mentioned things around wastage since government came into office. I believe that those are things that bolts and screws that can be tightened as we go along. But I think that, remember that because of the ambitious fertilizer subsidy program, truth is, if you go to the grassroots, a lot of farmers were registering bumper harvest. One thing about that bumper harvest is that it eased the pressure that was there about unga, so that at least people had got to add something to eat in the localities.
I want us to get into that discussion later on. Definitely, we're going to inform our people here on those kind of economic stuff that you're economic questions that you're raising here.
Yes.
But of course, you've talked of the opposition being in when it wants the government to solve all these things. But then the same statements that you're making here are the same ones that the president made when he was campaigning, saying so openly that the government, back then the Jubilee government led by President Uhuru Kenyatta, was solely responsible for the kind of economic mess that we were in. And right now you're telling us that the opposition is actually insensitive in making such...
No,
one thing how comes Ruto was right then, but wrong then, but now he's right? Or rather right then, but now he's wrong?
That I've not said. And remember, I'm not a politician.
Okay.
I am just a citizen of Kenya who is interested in matters governance.
So were they lied to by the president back then as well?
I wouldn't know, because the thing is, I was in Azimio. So when Azimio was saying that the people, that the government was responsible for the high cost of living, I knew that they were being disingenuous.
Okay, now when Azimio is saying that the government is responsible, then they're not actually genuine. That is what you see.
I think let us not mix issues.
But when Ruto said so before the elections, then he was very genuine.
No,
where do you draw the lines?
This is where we draw the line, my brother. When Ruto was campaigning, you say that he said that the government was solely responsible. Part of what was causing that high cost of living, I have told you, was public finance mismanagement. Because the person who had mismanaged our public spending was President Uhuru Kenyatta. And President Uhuru Kenyatta was still in office. So that to date, when you speak about the question of external debt, of sovereign debt, both domestic and external, look at the amount that the government pays to the local banks per year. Yes, in terms of share, or in terms of because of the debts that government took from the local banks, it is enormous. And remember that every money that goes to the consolidated fund, first charge debt. Understand? So when government has spent so much money in repayment of debts, it has got very little left to run government, to meet the cost of running government. So that when President Ruto made that claim then, that the government was responsible, I think he was saying the truth. The truth to the extent, that the person who had presided over that public finance mismanagement was still sitting at State House. Yes.
And then he also mentioned about the natural factors. In fact, he said that the government back then was hiding behind these natural factors to do with the crude
but you and
all that. Those things. Just listen to me.
So that this show does not appear like
No. I just don't understand how you are shifting the goalposts.
I am not shifting the goalposts. I have dealt with the question of public finance mismanagement. You and I know that the natural factors, for instance, you know that we do not have irrigation-fed agriculture. Our agriculture is still rain-fed. And you know that until around March, April, we had witnessed one of the longest droughts this sides of the tropics. Up to around 6 million people earlier in the year were unable to get food. So that is a statement of fact. That is not a political statement.
No, my question would be...
So the question is, and I know you want to make the argument that when I call out the Azimio coalition, that they were not interested. What I'm saying is that if Azimio team were interested in the high cost of living, they should have prioritized it as Agenda 1. So that we agree that if this is not Agenda 1, if we not discuss this issue conclusively, then we're not going to sit down with you. But you see, they went in, discussed all these other issues, and then the cost of living was coming at the very last when everyone else was disinterested in the dialogue. Now the people wanted to move on. So if they were interested, remember this is a beaten path again. When Kofi Annan was here in 2008, Kofi Annan said that the first agenda was cessation of hostilities. That was Agenda 1. So that if there was no hostility, there was no business that was going to be transacted. If NADCO was serious with the high cost of living, if Azimio was serious with the high cost of living, high cost of living should have been Agenda 1. The fact that it was not, is, in my view, is the clearest indication that the young people of Kenya were used as pawns for people to wiggle themselves into offices.
Are you convinced that the NADCO report is actually necessary and will help us propel us to the right direction?
I don't think that we had to sit in Bomas to make the recommendations that we made. Remember earlier in the year, President had sent a communique to both speakers where he was, among other things, requesting that we look into our governance structure, that we look at how do we introduce the question of the leader of official opposition and the office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary. Those are political imperatives. It is what you call constitutional democracy that I was alluding to earlier.
So in short, you're saying...
I don't think we had to go to Bomas.
Okay.
But now that we had gone to Bomas, Bomas also served its purpose that people who were told that their win had been snatched from them and that they were going to storm State House now had to be told that something was happening. It was used to manage our people. Okay. I think it was the height of irresponsibility on the part of politicians, but I could be wrong.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this conversation definitely with Wakili here cannot end anytime soon because as you can see, the show is lit. Allow me to stop this conversation at this particular moment, but of course we'll have him here on board again, and I'll be more than glad to host you, Kidimwaga, once again.
Gladly, I'll show up.
Ladies and gentlemen, happy festivities, happy holidays. May you have a Merry Christmas and a happy and prosperous New Year 2024. Allow me to stop this conversation at this particular moment for now, but of course you can weigh in on this conversation and tell us what you think about the National Dialogue Committee report. Do you think that it was necessary in the first place for us to have that kind of engagement? And do you think that those recommendations that were actually put forth by that committee will actually serve to help Kenyans get it right this time round? Till we have this conversation again, have yourself a lovely day. My name is Evans Okinyi.